This talk is called Inspector Web and the Mystery of the Shadow DOM. We're going to talk about web components and the underlying shadow DOM that makes them work. So hello, everyone. I'm Angelina. You can follow me on Twitter at Angelina Magnum. And I work at a company in Vancouver called Steam Clock Software. Is there anybody else here from Vancouver? Woo! Yeah, OK, so like 2 people. And we do mobile apps written in both JavaScript and Objective-C, and very often both. And before that, I worked on web development for years. And I started on AngelFire when I was like 12. My first website had gratuitous use of the blink tag and animated dolphins everywhere. And I thought it was pretty much the coolest thing ever. And I still think this stuff is the coolest stuff ever. So let's talk a little bit about how we currently do things. How do we currently build websites and web applications? Well, probably either you, the developer, or someone you're working for has an idea for some features, and you have a spec, and then you start thinking about, OK, well, what am I going to do to code these features and make things that people can interact with? And a really common pattern is that people will say, OK, I need a date picker, and they'll go find a UI component library like jQuery. And you'll probably do something like this. So you have some script tag where you insert jQuery, and then you insert maybe a plugin that's some more third-party code written by somebody else. And then still yet, you need to select an element and probably tell it to behave how you want it to. Hold on a sec here. Let me see if I can. There we go. That's better. And then after you do that, maybe you have more than one widget in your page. And you have some base styles for your widget, for all your widgets on your page. And then maybe you want the container, or maybe you want the contents of each of those widgets to behave slightly differently to those base styles. So you end up writing a lot of really specific CSS. I mean, who's seen this before, right? You write some widget styles, and then as your application grows and you need more and more specific selectors, you end up writing a lot more CSS to really get in there and be specific. And I mean, the way we're doing things now is kind of OK. I mean, it does the job, right? We're still building web applications really successfully, and we're all still employed as developers. And that's OK, but we end up with things like namespace and selector collisions, the more complexity we introduce in our applications. And sometimes, by doing all of this code injection and manipulation, there are elements you might not expect when iterating over your DOM. I mean, when you have a small application, it's really easy to say, OK, I know all the things that are going into this page, and I can sort of have a mental model so that I don't fuck shit up. But when you have more than one developer working on these sorts of things, and the complexity of your project grows, that becomes harder and harder to do. And so yeah, those widgets can sometimes interfere with one another, which is kind of frustrating. So we can do better, but we need something. And what we need is encapsulation. And what I'm talking about today with Shadow DOM and web components provides some really much needed encapsulation for front-end development, which I've been kind of wanting for a long time. So I discovered Shadow DOM because I'd read some article and someone mentioned it, and I thought, Shadow DOM? Well, that sounds pretty cool. And I had no idea what it was. And then it turned out that it happened to solve this encapsulation thing, and I got really excited because that's really cool. And so the idea here is, how do we create a boundary between the code we create and the code that consumes it? Iframes were, up until now, really the only way to do this. And if you were at Remy's talk earlier, you kind of learned that iframes are, well, you can do a lot of cool stuff with them, but they're kind of evil. And inserting more frames into your page can really slow it down. So we need another way to do this. So let's do a little bit of investigating, since we're all inspectors. Let's open up the web inspector here. Can everybody see that? Should I make it bigger? I can make it bigger if you maybe make it a bit bigger. So what I have here is just a Creative Commons video. It's an early animated film. And if we inspect this, go into the DOM. There we are. We can see that this video element is largely just a black box, right? I mean, like, we have some attributes on here, like the source attribute, and we can't see the inside of it. But if I go over to the cog here and I go into my experimental section here, by the way, in order for these demos to work, you need to be running Chrome Canary, and I'll talk a little bit about the state of implementation at the end of the talk. But we're going to go in there and click Show Shadow DOM, and then we're going to refresh the page. And then, if we go look at our video element again, hey, what's this? Who's this guy? We've got this shadow root in here, and if we expand that, there's a bunch of markup in there that we couldn't see before. So you've actually encountered Shadow DOM elements before and you didn't even know it. These are present in a lot of existing elements, like the input range, video element, and the audio element. And you can actually see in here that, a spoiler for later, is that you can have nested Shadow DOMs too. So there's actually a range element in there for the slider inside of the video element. So the gist of Shadow DOM, like what's actually going on here, right? The best way to think about this is that Shadow DOM is basically a tiny document that lives inside of a host element. And when that tiny document lives inside of a host element, maybe it's a div, in this case, in our example, it's the video element, that DOM is encapsulated and invisible to the parent DOM unless you otherwise somehow break that boundary. And so yeah, browsers already use them, and now developers can too. So let's create minimal shadow. I have this div here. I've just put a border on it so you guys can see it. But if we go into my markup here, we can see that it's just a div with the ID of spooky. Right now it doesn't have any children or anything, and it's just an empty div. So let's go into console. And let's select spooky. OK, so we've got spooky. And then let's do some voodoo with spooky. Let's give it its own shadow root. And we pass the argument of spooky, because that's the element that we're giving the shadow root to. And then we insert a shadow root into spooky. But that's not very exciting, because we don't have anything inside that shadow DOM yet. So let's give that some inner HTML. Let's say we do the classic hello world. But let's say hello JSConf.eu. Huzzah, it appears. OK, that's not very exciting, right? Great. That seems really similar to how we're already doing things, just injecting code into the DOM. But what's really cool about this is you guys can see that it says hello JSConf.eu. If we go into the source and we look for our div spooky, and let me zoom this in here, you can see that spooky is still empty. And, but that's really strange, right? Because we're seeing this text there, and you just saw me insert this shadow DOM, so why doesn't it exist in spooky? And I'm going to tell you. So how this works, oh, that's kind of cut off. Don't know what happened there. Nope. OK, well, let's just keep going. So how this works is the shadow root is inserted into the host node. And when that happens, the rendering of the shadow DOM replaces the rendering of the children of the host nodes. So the original nodes in the source aren't altered at all. You just replace the rendering of them. And so, I mean, that's all well and good. I mean, the example we used here is that I just inserted some h1 tag into an empty element. But what happens if these elements already have children, right? I mean, we may not necessarily want to totally wipe out the content that's there. And so we have a, zoom. Oh, hey, did I zoom out on? That's what happened. Excellent, excellent. Thank you. All right, so we have a special tag called the content tag that will specify the insertion point for the child elements of the host element into our shadow DOM tree. So for example, we've got the content tag there. And I also wanted to mention that there is a shadow tag that will allow you to nest other shadow roots. So let's try it. OK, so I've got an unordered list here. And the ID is spooky with children, because we have this div with unordered list element. It's called spooky 2, maybe. And what did I call that? Spooky with children? OK. And then let's see. 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 Let's see So we've got our element selected. And then we create another shadow root. And we've inserted a shadow root. So that disappeared because we've replaced the rendering of the children of that div with our shadow element, which is, of course, now empty. All right, so what do we want to do with this one? Let's say we insert a title. We'll insert like an H2 before that list element. And then we want to throw in our content tag. And we don't actually need to put anything in here. The browser knows that when it encounters that content tag that we just insert the child elements from the host element. So there we go. So now we have a title, and we have the list here. And if we go back into our source, and we look for our, we don't want to search by title, spooky with children. This is all tiny again, but you can see here that that H1 is nowhere to be found. The only thing that is there is the host, or the host element's children. So that's all well and good. Now, that this is inserting a shadow DOM imperatively using JavaScript. But there's also these cool new magic words that we have coming for web components called these tags, template and element. So if you're a designer and you're watching this talk, then you might encounter these more than a developer operating on them might. And the relationship between template and element and shadow DOM, this imperative JavaScript, and why you should care is anytime an element, this custom element, includes a template tag, we're going to do that together in a moment, that inserts a shadow DOM into the host element. So this is a way to insert shadow DOM declaratively. So there's this template tag, and when we specify a template, it's basically inert markup used later by its pal element, as I'm going to show you. And the contents are parsed by the browser, but not rendered until they are inserted using the custom element. And so here's just an example use case that you might want to use this for, creating a comment template. And this one I love because it's affectionately called the element, which is just kind of weird. But that's what it's called. And in fact, in the polyfill I use for the demos and stuff, it's called like HTML element, which is kind of verbose. So element. And these are custom DOM elements defined by you. You can create modular, reusable components using this. So it's time for a little bit of a story. So a common case that I see with web developers, maybe they work at a consulting shop and some big firm hires them and says, okay, Angelina, we have this giant code base that we don't necessarily want to throw away, but we kind of want to redo our front end a little bit, restyle things, but you can't change what's under the hood in a terrible amount. And so I'm like, well, that's kind of dumb, right? Like maybe their markup is really, really awful, and you're forced to work with it. And this is something that I've seen a lot, actually. I've been stuck in this situation, and other developers I know in Vancouver have to deal with this. They complain about it all the time. And so maybe you have some crappy markup like this. Let's inspect this one. So we have another UL here. And we have some classes on here. These aren't organized particularly well, right? I mean, like these are some news stories, and we've got a bunch of list elements. Some of them have the class applied to them of breaking. And maybe what's been asked of us is that, okay, Angelina, what I need you to do is I need you to go and take that list, and it's going to make more sense for our users if we sort out the breaking news stories in their own list and everything else in another list. And so that's what we're going to do with a custom HTML element. So let's pop over to Sublime Text here. So a few things that make this work. We're going to write a custom element over in this news component HTML thing here. At the very bottom here, I have some JavaScript included. This script here is written by Dmitry Glazkov, who is the author of the Shadow DOM spec. And this polyfill makes it so that we can actually make custom elements, because this stuff is all really, really bleeding edge, so it's not quite there in the browser yet. Very experimental. And then the other thing I want to show you is that if I go all the way back up to the top here, and where is it? Much like including our style sheets, I've done something very similar here. I've included this component, and I've given a link to this HTML document for my news component. And so you can see that templates for your components are included in a very similar way, very similar pattern to JavaScript and CSS already. So you're kind of familiar with how to do that stuff. So if we go over to newscomponent.html, what I've got here is basically an empty HTML document. No surprises. And we're going to do a custom element. So the first thing we need, of course, is this element tag. And inside of that element tag, we're going to want to give it a template. And we need to tell the browser a little bit of information about our custom element. So let's give it a name. Let's call it news, because that's what it is. And we're going to be telling that that unordered list element to behave like our new element. But maybe we want to keep some of the properties and functionality and stuff that we have sort of already from our unordered list. And we can do that by extending. So we just do extends, and we're extending the unordered list element. OK. Oh, thank you. I am. That would have been embarrassing, hey? OK. So template. And then let's create a div, and we will give this the class of exciting stories, perhaps. And we'll make another div for everything else. And we want an unordered list. And remember earlier I was showing you that content tag, so we're going to do that same thing here. And then for everything else, we're going to put our breaking stories up there, and we're going to put the rest of them here too. Oh, but wait, I already used my content tag, right? So how does the browser know which elements to put in each div, in each unordered list, right? Because we've got two content tags. We need some way to differentiate between them. And let me just put my unordered list here. Sorry, I'm keeping a lot of stuff in my working memory, so if I miss something, you're totally welcome to correct me. That's totally cool. In fact, I would even appreciate it. So, oh, maybe we give it a title too. We'll give this a title here that says "Breaking Stories." Cool. It's going to be awesome. So we have this special attribute for the content tag called the select attribute, which actually I find a little bit confusing because with HTML and CSS and JavaScript, we've used this select keyword kind of in a lot of places, so I don't really know about this one. But so what we're going to do is we're going to select from the child nodes of the host element by CSS selector which of those child elements appear here. So we're going to put the breaking elements. And then we don't need to do anything for this one. The browser will know that if these child elements do not have the breaking class applied, we're just going to dump the rest of them into that content tag. OK. So we save that. And there's still one more thing that we need to do in our index.html. So right now, we've just got this normal unordered list. These things aren't separate at all. And maybe what do we want to do here? Maybe just to show that they are broken up, we might want to add some styles. But let's just see how this looks first. So let's go into our markup. And I didn't put an ID on that. OK. There we are, breaking. And so the last thing we need to do in order to make this all work, we've included this polyfill, which ideally, it's going to go away and hopefully soon. And we've included our component in our header. What we need to do is tell this unordered list how to behave and that we are putting a custom element in here, or that it is a custom element. And we do that with an attribute that is called the is attribute. And we're going to say that this unordered list is news. So if we save that and we refresh, kablamo, OK. So what we've done here is we've remixed this content, right? So we took this really crappy markup that we were kind of probably stuck with. Maybe this is some big enterprise website. And we were able to remix this in a way that's more, hopefully more usable for our users that are looking for news stories. And we've got this title in here. And then here's our breaking stories and the rest of them there. And of course, again, if we go into the source and we look at where the breaking unordered list is, the only thing that's there is this unordered list with the is attribute applied and news. And so then it just remixes that content, and I shouldn't have clicked on that. So that's pretty cool. We can remix this existing content. So some interesting points about this boundary is I was having conversations with people about CSS selectors and specificity. Any CSS that is applied from the parent DOM and its style sheets will not affect the shadow elements, but it will affect the elements that have been inserted from the host node into the content element. So that's an important thing to note. And for those shadow elements, if you do want the styles from your parent document to apply to the shadow children specifically, you can do this apply author styles attribute on the template element, or imperatively in JavaScript, you can do root.apply author styles equals true. And then recently, I noticed in the explainer, the components explainer that's out there. By the way, if you're following along and you've decided, like, oh, I'm going to find out what Angelina is talking about and if she's making up this shit, and you go and you look at the web components spec, I mean, that's all good, but it's kind of terse. Go look for the web components explainer. It's actually a really good document to take a look at. There's this reset style inheritance, and if you set that, it sort of uber enforces that absolutely no user agent styles will be applied to your shadow elements. So perhaps you're in a situation where maybe you're a designer and you're inserting some markup using this shadow stuff that's just purely presentational markup, right? Like that's a perfect case here because this stuff is invisible to the parent DOM, and so it's not going to affect the semantic content of your web page at all. And you can do this reset style inheritance, and this is sort of, in my mind, this is like the future for like the quickest CSS reset ever, because it will take off the user agent styles and set everything. None of those styles will apply. So some ideas, like what's some stuff that we could use this for, right? Like I talked about how we can remix existing content. I mean, that's great, but that's not going to be not really pertinent to everybody's situation. But using the is selector and creating these modular components will allow us to rapidly prototype websites by telling elements what they is. It's not a grammar mistake. I did that on purpose to be clever. So imagine a world where we have like this library of elements, and you say to your designer, okay, I need like a date picker widget in there, and I need you to do something like those news stories. You can tell various elements what they are, and then they'll behave in a certain way, and you can do it really quickly because you've got all these pre-composed templates. Another idea I had, I originally gave this talk to a company in Vancouver that does mobile websites, and we had the idea that we could use this to serve up alternate navigation control for a mobile website. So anybody that's done mobile websites know that if we've got like some big horizontal navigation in our header, maybe as the size of the browser collapses slowly, we turn that horizontal navigation into a drop-down menu or something like that. So perhaps we could combine media queries and this technology, and then we could create, remix the content and create better navigation patterns for mobile websites. And then overall, because we're creating like these encapsulated components, it's easier to mix and match frameworks and components because they're not going to interfere with one another. So no longer do you really need to be like, okay, I'm going to tie myself into this one component framework, and then everybody else stay out, just because it makes people a little bit nervous. So this stuff is all really cool and all, but can we actually use it, right? You heard me say earlier that I'm using Chrome Canary, and I have this experimental flag turned on, and I've got some polyfill, and all the people that want to bring home stuff to do in production are like, okay, we're going to walk out now. And I mean, yeah, so can you use it for experiments? Yes. Can you use it in production? No. Right now, we have creation of shadow roots in Chrome Canary only, to my knowledge. And you want to use Dmitry Glazkov's polyfill, available on GitHub for component support like Element. And just for things like the video tag and the audio tag, this is just a little bit of niceness. When I was making this talk, I compiled all the WebKit prefix styles I could find for people that want to start styling the native elements like video, audio, input range, because I realized that there actually wasn't a big list of them. So I have this gist here that you guys can check out, and it's not super detailed. It's basically just a list of all the ones I could find, and hopefully you guys will experiment and tell me what works, what doesn't. And hopefully by using these prefix styles and talking about it, we can encourage other browser vendors to do this, and we can push it forward. And also, Jeff Griffiths from Mozilla tweeted this to me today. He was posting in the queue for Mozilla saying like, hey, Shadow DOM's actually a thing, and trying to encourage some Mozilla support. So that brings me to some important stuff wrapping up. And I mean, so Shadow DOM and web components, they offer encapsulation and modularity for your front-end code, which is a very good thing and definitely needed. But use this stuff and talk about it and make stuff with it and play with it, because browser devs do notice and they do care what you think, because you're the people that are making applications for what they've made, right? So yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say. I want to introduce you to how these things work, and the next talk by Divya is going to be sort of building on these ideas, talking about web components and CSS regions and putting those together. So the slides will be posted soon. You can follow me on Twitter or email me. So go be brave and make wonderful things, and tell me what you learned about web components. So. Probably.
Yes.
Is the is attribute something that I can set and reset at any time and have it change? Like, can I just decide to suddenly change the display of something?
This was actually a question I had when I did my beta of this talk in Vancouver. And to be honest with you, my answer then, as it is now, is I actually don't know. We actually tried it live in the browser, and no, that did not work. But actually, that's something that I actually might want to mention to the browser devs, because that's, I think, absolutely crucial. That's really important. I want that too.
Yeah.
Hello.
So if you use some CSS in the Shadow DOM, do you know, is that CSS reused for each Shadow DOM, or is WebKit allocating some new memory each time?
I'm not sure how the memory use works, to be honest with you. That is not something that was in the scope of this talk. But yeah, so I don't know about that one.
Hello, with the Shadow DOM, could you maybe also add a nickelback option to the audio tag?
So sorry, what he's talking about is that when we were out, we were talking about what our companies do. My company makes an app that's coming out called Party Monster, and it's a joke because in this app that's for DJing parties, we have a refuse to play Nickelback mode, which is sort of our throwback from Vancouver to apologize for Nickelback. So, but no, there's maybe you could make your own sort of browser remix somehow. But I think that's probably the last question, or Jed's taking another one. Oh, one more. Okay, cool.
Hello, thanks for the talk. I have a question. If you generate that Shadow DOM with JavaScript and you lose the reference to your variable where you used to create it, do you have actually a way to get access again to it?
Yes, come talk to me afterwards. There are ways. So I mean, here's the thing about the Shadow DOM. It's not a totally black box. Hey, spoiler again. You should see it as a corruptible boundary, but only when you, the developer, choose to corrupt that boundary. And there are some JavaScript functions that can traverse that boundary and access elements in the Shadow DOM, much like when you go into iframes and do stuff in iframes if you were in Remy Sharp's talk.
Awesome. Thank you very much.